In theory, schools are supposed to be a safe haven for children and adolescents. Schools should serve as places for growth and development, for exploration, for elevation, for all children. What has been occurring increasingly, however, is that schools have been serving as places for legalized abuse of American children. And this abuse appears to involve both psychological abuse and sexual exploitation under the guise of education. And so, what is happening instead of schools being a safe haven, schools are now increasingly serving as grooming places. And so, child education is actually being used as a grooming mechanism. Now, most would agree that health education is integral to education for children and adolescents in terms of holistic education. But what is happening increasingly is that health education is being used as a guise for grooming children and adolescents. We're going to talk very quickly about what grooming entails, and you will be encouraged to start to think about the many ways in which health education, which education is now increasingly being used as a grooming process. Now, some people might argue that it's not grooming. However, when you look at the meaning of grooming, you can see how some of the dynamics that are going on with respect to these health education initiatives, how they constitute grooming processes for children and put children at risk for both physical abuse and sexual abuse, in addition to emotional abuse. And not only do you have educators participating in this dynamic, you also have other individuals who are in the helping professions participating in this dynamic and also advancing this dynamic, fighting vehemently for this dynamic to take place under, again, the guise of education. Given the education of the helping professionals and the education of the educators, they should all know better. Now, of course, there may be many explanations that they might be giving themselves to justify what is going on. They know, or they should know, that what is going on is inappropriate in terms of age. When you look at the ages of the children, when you look at the cognitive development of the children, when you look at the social and emotional development of the children, you should know, based upon your own educational level, based upon being an adult, that much of what is going on is inappropriate and it is harmful for children. So we're just going to quickly look at a couple of definitions of grooming so that you get an understanding of what is meant by grooming. And also, you can see some examples of this dynamic of grooming with respect to children and adolescents. And so this article offers that grooming is when someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child or young person so they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. Now, again, some individuals who are in positions of educator or helping professional, they might not be telling themselves that that's what they are doing. But if they step back for a minute, if they are even interested in stepping back for a minute, they will see that what is going on in many instances is not education. What is going on is manipulation. What is going on is indoctrination. What is going on is exploitation. And so ultimately, what is going on in this process of grooming is abuse, leading to the potential for even more abuse in the future. So the article goes on to indicate that children and young people who are groomed can be sexually abused, exploited, or trafficked. Anyone can be a groomer, no matter their age, gender, or race. And this is important to keep in mind because some people believe that this is all a part of an LGBTQ IA plus agenda. However, many of the educators that are participating in these dynamics and many of the helping professionals that are participating in these dynamics are not identified as LGBTQIA plus. They are identified otherwise. And so this is not about sex and gender. in terms of the groomer. And this is about someone being a groomer. And so being a groomer can transcend all sorts of identities and demographics. And in this case, it is definitely doing so. And then, of course, you have those who are policymakers also participating in this dynamic when, of course, based upon their levels of education, their levels of expertise, simply being adults, they should know better. What is noteworthy is that if you review some of the positions of the major associations with respect to health education and sex education, what you will find is a collective of these associations. They are pretty much speaking in one voice. And so you are not hearing significant diversity of perspective regarding sex education and health education related to children and adolescents. You are not hearing included varying perspectives. And so everyone, all of these associations are pretty much saying the same thing, which is very odd that you would get all of these different members and all of these different voices saying essentially the same thing. And so that's what's being highlighted, I should say that. So there indeed is diversity. However, what is being highlighted, what is being centered, is sort of a one voice dynamic. And so it's interesting that this article, this is an earlier article that's coming out of the ABA. Of course, there's a caveat indicating that the ABA, this isn't the position of the ABA. But this is an article about understanding sexual grooming in child abuse cases. And so one of the things that the authors point out is that grooming is a preparation process. And so it involves that breaking down of boundaries of the children, breaking down of boundaries of the target, of the victim, in preparation for abuse that may come in the future. And so that's a lot of what is being seen in some of these supposed education processes. Children are being sexualized under the guise, again, of being educated. It's also noteworthy that there is an increasing push to push parents aside with respect to health, education, and welfare decisions related to their children. Now, historically and legally, this is an oddity because historically and legally, parents have the uppermost right with respect to the health, education, and welfare of their children as long as they are not abusing them. But of course, what is happening is an assertion that if the parents aren't doing what the schools want them to do, what the educators want them to do, then they are being abusive towards the children. It's important that if you are a parent that you check out your state's legislation. You look at those statutes about what actually constitutes abuse and neglect. Make sure you are not doing any of those things, but also make sure that your children are not being subjected to those things in the course of the school day, again, under the guise of education. Your primary role as parent is to protect your children. And in many instances, what we are seeing is parents abdicating that role and giving up that role for those who are legally understood as in loco parentis. And so those are the teachers and those individuals in loco parentis, of course, meaning in place of the parent. But it doesn't mean generally in place of the parent. It simply means that when the parent is not around while the child is at school, that the educators, the school officials, are sort of taking on that role. This does not make them the parents, and so some of them are becoming very confused about who they are and what their roles are. And it is incumbent upon parents to reassert themselves in terms of their rights with respect to their actual children. It's also interesting to note how so many political initiatives right now are centering on children. Now, what's noteworthy is that these political initiatives are not centering on feeding children, housing children, and clothing children. These political initiatives are focused on indoctrinating children, creating in children a particular mindset, a particular disposition related to sex, as if that is the major priority in the lives of all of these children. And so that alone alerts you to the fact that many of these initiatives are not genuine. And so to wrap this up, we're going to touch on what this article in the American Bar Association website talks about. And what it talks about here, which is central to what we are talking about, is that grooming takes place, this predatory grooming takes place in some instances under the guise of education. And it specifically states here that one way that this grooming takes place is discussing sexually explicit information under the guise of education. And so, again, back to you parents and healthcare providers, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that your children are not being groomed, that your patients are not being groomed, that your students are not being groomed under the guise of education. If you don't know what is appropriate for specific ages of children in terms of what they should be learning, what they should be exposed to, then you are encouraged to take some classes so that you can learn a little bit more about the cognitive development of children, about the social and emotional development of children. Sometimes individuals are asserting that children have all sorts of positions and children are saying all sorts of things that are completely inconsistent with the cognitive, the intellectual levels of the children. Some of the words that the children are supposedly saying, some of the constructs that the children are purportedly discussing, they are completely inconsistent with the developmental levels of the children in question. Now, of course, some might offer that the children are precocious and the children are very insightful and they really are aware of what they are talking about. But I offer to you, as someone who has evaluated a number of children, that many of these things that the children are purportedly saying are inconsistent with the developmental levels of the children. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.